Good morning, and welcome to OCP's webinar on using Antiphons and Chant in the liturgy. Now, before you get started, for best viewing, you should close other programs or applications. It will improve your viewing and sound quality. You will be able to use this question section on your control panel to ask questions during the webinar, and at the end, we'll take some time to answer those questions. You can type those in at any time, but we'll focus on those at the end. My name is Angela Westoff-Johnson, and I'm excited to spend the next hour with you. I direct music at the cathedral here in Portland, Oregon, and I'm also on staff as the managing music editor here at OCP. I begin each choir rehearsal with a prayer from one of OCP's offerings called Choir Prayers and More Choir Prayers. I'd like to begin this morning with one of the prayers called Giving Thanks. Lord, this is the time of year for giving thanks. Thank you for the profound gift of inspiration that accompanies our music. Thank you for sustaining the quality of our sound. Thank you for ears that are becoming sensitive to pitch. Thank you for the ability to laugh at ourselves. Thank you for the new music, always bringing a challenge to our skills. Thank you for the faithfulness of our members, for people who sing with enthusiasm, for high notes and low notes, and especially for one another. So thank you for being here with me this morning to talk about antiphons and chant. Now, you were able to send in some questions over the past few weeks, and I read through a lot of those, and hopefully we'll be able to answer some of those questions. The biggest question, well, the one that was asked quite a bit is, what are antiphons? Just the basic definition of the antiphons. Antiphonal chants accompany liturgical actions. So the introit accompanies the entrance of the priest or the acolytes, the readers, how you do that in your parish. The offertory chant as the gifts are brought forward, and the communion chant during the beginning of the distribution of communion. The entrance chant, probably the one done most often, the entrance antiphon, is really, like I said, to accompany the procession by proclaiming the proper prayer of the day. That's straight from the germ, the general instruction of the Roman Missal. Now, some people would say that we have already gathered. The people are already in church, so the entrance chant begins as the priest enters. It's not about us gathering, it's their entering into the liturgy. So after the people have gathered, the entrance chant begins as the priest enters with the deacons and ministers. The purpose of this chant is to open the celebration, to foster the unity of those who have gathered, to introduce their thoughts to the mystery of the liturgical season or festivity, and accompany the procession of the priests and ministers. The germ goes on to say that the singing at this time is done either alternately by the choir and the people, or in a similar way by the cantor and the people, or entirely by the people, or by the choir alone. Well, boy, that's really open. Not very specific there at all. I love choral music, but I don't want to begin my liturgy with just a choral piece or the choir singing alone. That's just my opinion, but you can do what you wish. But the antiphons allow the people to participate, our offering of the antiphons, to participate in a small way while still singing the proper text. So in the United States, there are 4 different options for the entrance chant. This gets a little bit confusing. I'll go through it quickly, and we'll kind of talk a little bit more later about that. But the antiphon from the Roman Missal, or the antiphon and its psalm from the Roman Missal, or the graduale, the Roman gradual, as set to music there. The seasonal antiphon from the graduale simplex, a song from another collection of psalms and antiphons approved by the CCB, the Conference of Bishops, or the diocesan bishop, including psalms arranged in responsorial or metrical forms, so where the people sing the refrain, and the choir, the cantor, would sing the verses, or in a metered form where the people sing everything, or a suitable liturgical song similarly. So like a hymn, I would say most people in parishes begin the entrance chant. That's the New Roman Missal name. We still often call it a gathering song or entrance song, but the proper term is entrance chant. Most people begin with a hymn, or a lot of people begin with a hymn that sets the tone for the liturgy. But if you want to get on this whole antiphon, proper text of the day, then that's what we're exploring here today. The Latin Gregorian chants, they're the sung propers. They're found in the Graduale Romanum. That includes the introit, the offertory, and the communion antiphons. So the English antiphons are found in the Roman Missal. There's the picture of the Roman Missal there. The Roman Missal does not include the offertory antiphon. So the Latin texts are in the Graduale, and the English text, the English spoken propers, are in the Roman Missal. Now, the Roman Missal, it specifically says that these are spoken antiphons, but it doesn't say that they cannot be sung. So that's what we have sort of a new interest in setting the music, the English antiphons to music. The spoken propers are printed in your missal. So you will see that, especially if you go to daily mass, they quite often speak the antiphons, the entrance antiphon and the communion antiphon, because often there's not music at the daily masses. So you'll see those or start to look for those in your missal. So antiphonal chants, such as the introit and the communion antiphons, refer to chants in which two choirs sing in alternation. So if you've been to monasteries or see one choir on one side and another on the other side, that often the Liturgy of the Hours are sung that way, where they're call and response. One group does the antiphon, the other the verses, and back and forth. Now the ordinary of the Mass, the Kyrie, the Gloria, the Sanctus, those parts of the Mass, they are not considered antiphonal chants, but sometimes they are sung or composed in an antiphonal style. So there's through composed glorias, and there are glorias where the people, the assembly, sing just a refrain while the choir sings the verses. But they are not intended necessarily to be sung that way. They can be, but that's not the intention there. So I think more and more people are singing through composed glorias, and for good reason. The people should sing the text, the entirety of the text. Makes it wonderful when they sing the whole Gloria. All right, so OCP's offering, newest offering of antiphons, the St. Meinrad entrance and communion antiphons for the church year. Now, Columba Kelly is a name that we've probably all heard of. He's now been going to NPM and doing workshops, and he's a delight. His whole life he has dedicated to these antiphons, his whole adult composing life. There are 6 volumes of the antiphons. They're beautiful covers, as you can see there. Advent and Christmas we're starting in the top left. Advent and Christmas, Lent Holy Week, Easter through Pentecost, Ordinary Time 1, Ordinary Time 2. They're just divided someplace in the number there. I can't remember the exact division. And the Solemnities and Proper of Saints. There's a little book in the front left there, you will see, that is for the assembly. And then the CD is a sampling. Not every antiphon could possibly fit on any CD. So there's just a sampling of the different seasons and different modes. You've probably heard of the Meinrad tones. We'll talk about that in a second. The melodies of these antiphons, they are inspired by the Latin Gregorian chants that are found in the Graduale, but they are not identical. They follow the modality and imitate the melodic patterns, but they use the rhythm of the English language. If you've ever had the opportunity to hear Father Columba Kelly speak, he talks all about the English language and the emphasis on the text, and that's why they can't fit in exactly to what is in the Graduale. There are 8 tones that are used for the psalm verses that are known as the Meinrad tones. So the next slide here will show you can't see them very well, but I wanted you to see the 8 different tones that exist. Once you know these 8 tones, it's a piece of cake because the verses are like falling off a log once you have sung through them over and over. And they're used throughout the whole liturgical year for all the different feasts and solemnities. So it's not as daunting or overwhelming as it might appear in the beginning. So the music for each verse, as you saw in those 8 psalm tones, consists of a reciting tone, the long note that most of the text is sung on, where it says, sing a new song, 1 or 2 preparatory notes those are the preparatory notes that lead to the final accented note there. Sing a new song to the Lord. So sing a new song is where most of the reciting happens. When you sing these, it's really important to avoid, treating every syllable, every word as if it had the same importance as another word. We don't speak the English language that way. So it's really, really important to speak through these. Talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes, but to feel the rhythm and the flow of the speech. Singing them initially, if it's new to you, is not the best way to go about it. It's really better to speak through the text. And I do that quite often with the choir. When I feel like it's too heavy or it's plodding along, put the music away, don't think about the music. Because in chant, the music is not the most important part. It's the text. So what OCP has done with these 6 volumes of antiphons is taken this notation, which you see here, Gregorian notation, and have put it into modern notation. So this right here is the first Sunday of Advent. Kind of look through that. Some of you may feel very comfortable singing Gregorian notation. Others might not. Many choir members struggle. It's not as hard as you'd think. The switch back and forth is where it gets more difficult, I find. So our next slide will show you the first Sunday of Advent as presented in our new resources. They have accompaniment, which you may or may not use. At the bottom of that first page, you will see a congregational refrain. And that's what's so wonderful about these, that the assembly, the congregation, they can participate in these with that little assembly refrain. So there's many different ways to do these antiphons. We're going to sing a little bit for you this morning. I've got a couple of my colleagues here with me, Travis and Joseph, and we're going to go through some of the first Sunday of Advent here.
In you I have trusted. salvation. I have hoped in you all day long. To you, O God, I lift up my soul.
And back to the antiphon.
To you I lift up my soul, O my God. In you I have trusted. Let me not be put to shame, nor let my enemies exult over me, and let none who hope in you be put to shame.
Excellent. So I just want to chat about a few things here, if I can, about this music. Conducting chant is, how do I say this? It's very different than our training of conducting choral music. There's no meter. There's no pattern to a conducting motion. You stress the strong notes and words, and you don't have to. It's tough because I'm moving my arms around right now, and you can't see me. You emphasize the stressed words, and you let the other ones just roll off and connect to the next one. I'd love to be able to show you what my music looks like when I'm conducting chant, because I mark it up with my own. We all have our own different sort of shorthand when conducting. I use a series of little slashes, and sometimes my music gets put back with my choral music, and I'll say, who's got my copy? Because they have no idea what all those things those little marks mean. But weak and strong beats, I mark those, and I can look down and I know exactly how I'm conducting it from that. The first word in chant is rarely, I have to say rarely because it does happen once in a while, but it is rarely the most important word or note, right? That's pretty standard in choral music. The first note, choirs often want to sing heavy, but it's not about that note. It's sometimes about the note 3 or 4 notes later, that sort of high point of the phrase and that rise and fall of the line that is so essential when singing chant. Okay, so there are different ways to do this. At the cathedral, we used these for all of Lent last year, which you'll see the next Sunday is the first Sunday of Lent. It uses mode 8 as well. I wanted to show you how when you then move from one mode 8 to another mode 8, we know this. This feels comfortable to us. But how I use these, the choir sang the antiphon, just like we did it right now. The cantor sings the short congregational refrain, and then we all sang with the assembly. Cantor sang the verses, back to the refrain, verse, refrain, verse, refrain, antiphon. That's where it gets, you can do whatever you want. Maybe you sang through that antiphon and you're just relieved you got through it. Sometimes we would have rehearsed that better than we did. So getting into that mode initially was a bit of a struggle, but the second time around it's easier. You may not want to end with the antiphon again, but there's different options, different ways to do it. Let's look at the first Sunday of Lent. All right, give us a little more.
When he calls on me, I will answer him. I will deliver him and give him glory. I will grant him length of days. Show us, O Lord, your saving power. Show us, O Lord, your saving power. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High and abides in the shade of the Almighty says to the Lord, my refuge, my stronghold, my God, in whom I trust. Show us, O Lord, your saving power.
And we could go back to the antiphon and sing that again. Look at your music here. I just want to give you a few little tips. You'll see when he calls, and you look at that and you think, what's on that second B flat there? It's a staccato note with a tenuto over it. That's in chant. I'm just walking away for a second, but you stick with us there. In chant, there are so many different little lines and marks that might not make immediate sense to you. That little line, vertical line above that epicema, that horizontal line, just adds a little bit of length or slows down a little bit. You sometimes see a note that has a vertical line this way. That means a mild emphasis. That's a vertical epicema as opposed to a horizontal epicema. So what does he mean by that? Well, you can approach these however you want, because I even told Columba Kelly, well, here's what I did, but you weren't there, so we did what felt right to us. That's the way you should approach it. But a little bit of that staccato means there's a little space after it, as opposed to later in that system, right here. It just adds length. And you don't need to re-articulate the next B flat because there's a slur above it. Okay, let's just sing that first system again.
When he calls on me, I will answer him. I will deliver him.
See that? Just a little bit of space there. The refrains, the congregational refrains, are so simple and they're so easy that they will join with in no time. So there isn't this feeling of they aren't participating at all, that it's a concert. It really isn't in this, in the way that we've approached these. Thank you. We'll do a little more singing in a few minutes. So as I mentioned earlier, there are different ways to sing the presentation in these, the St. Meinrad entrance and communion antiphons. So you could sing it alone, just the little antiphon, and have a pause and go into your own opening song, a hymn. I love hymns. I love traditional hymnody. So I wouldn't mind doing it that way. I didn't do it that way during Lent, but I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So you could sing it alone before the hymn. You could repeat the psalm verses. The antiphon is sung by the choir. The psalm verses by the choir, by the cantor or choir, like we just sang those together. And then the antiphon is done. And not do the congregational refrain. You could do the way we sang it for you, as a complete entrance and communion procession. The antiphon is sung by the choir or the cantor, followed by the congregational refrain by cantor, and then repeated. Then the psalm verses by the cantor, alternating back and forth with the congregational refrain, and then ending with the antiphon, which is how I use them during Lent. Usually the procession of the priests and the deacon and the acolytes and the lector, all those people process in, they were up in place and then we would go into the final antiphon. So it adds a little bit of time. Or in its simpler form, when you maybe don't have as much time, because the antiphons, they do take a little bit of time to, they do great things. Spending the rehearsal time on chant it will roll into your choral singing, so it's worth the time. But you could omit the antiphon entirely, which sort of defeats the purpose of using these antiphons, right? Okay. So that's the Meinrad antiphons. I strongly suggest you taking a look at them. You will not be disappointed. But OCP also has communion antiphons that are for SATB choir by Christopher Walker. And I love these. I can't say enough about these. Use them every Sunday. So there are 2 volumes. Volume 1 is the seasons and solemnities and feasts. Volume 2 is ordinary time. So I first started by buying the first volume for my choir, and we used them, I don't remember if it was Advent or Lent that we started them, and we loved them. The next slide will show you a couple of pages that I chose, just to show you, to give you an idea of what to expect. So as you know, the communion antiphons, oftentimes there's more than one text. This is a complete resource, so he provided both texts if there are 2 on that Sunday. And he usually gave you one in a simpler form and one that's more choral, as you can see on that 3rd Sunday in ordinary time. So just a nice little chant there. The one below it is a little more elaborate. And some Sundays, like some of the feasts, what Chris Walker did was gave you one text, like for Ascension, and he'd give you a simpler one and a more elaborate one. So you could grow into those. These are really wonderful. We only have 3 of us here, so we can't do a 4-part thing, but let's look at the very top one, 3rd Sunday in ordinary time. Look toward the Lord.
Look toward the Lord and be radiant, and be radiant. Let your faces not be abashed. Look toward the Lord. Look toward the Lord.
So it feels like chant, right? It is chant. It's there's not a meter there. Modern notation makes it very simple. Chris did a great job with setting these texts. They perfectly lead into a communion song. So these are not written with a verse like Columba Kelly's are. He has a communion antiphon and a congregational refrain and verses. That's not what Mr. Walker did here. These are choral moments, and I love them. I often send him an email and say, I love the antiphon from yesterday. Monday morning, I'll send him that. They're just exciting. But they don't feel performancy, which is the risk that you run sometimes when you have pieces like that. All right. So now let's just talk about, in general, chant. Singing chant. If you look at that page, actually, the communion antiphon that we just sang, look toward the Lord, that little line up there, that's a quarter bar line. They mean different things, and you can do different things with them. Mr. Walker, realizing that these were really choral pieces, he gave breath marks in there, if you see those. But chant notation is very, very different. And singing chant with your choir can be overwhelming if they've never done it before. Really, the most important thing is the text. A chant is the rhythmic speaking or singing of words or sounds, often primarily in one or two main pitches. Remember that reciting tone that we talked about. Oh, hello. Called the reciting tones. Chant is common in diverse spiritual traditions. Of course, not just Catholics chant. You hear amazing chant, African chant, or tribal chant. It's all the same thing. It's just about the text. Gregorian chant takes its name from Pope Gregory, St. Gregory. Of course, there's lots of discussion about that, if really that's the most, how much influence he had on Gregorian chant. There are simple chants that the people should sing, can sing, very simple, like the Kyrie, or the chant mass, which is it's called in your breaking bread or music issue. The people can sing that very easily. More complex chant that is done often in monasteries, vespers, beautiful. Complex chant is often for cantors or small groups. They are more elaborate. So there is simple, I think kind of more in the middle, more complex, and complex. That is just too difficult for an assembly to sing. We're not going to get into Gregorian notation because that would be a college course in itself, right? But traditionally written in neumes, which evolved from other notation. But I encourage you, if you're just starting to get into chant with your choir or your assembly, to use, to not start with chant notation, with neumes, to use modern notation. You'll see this Laus Tibi Christi. That is our OCP's resource for chants. It was intended to be a supplement to the hymnal or the worship resource you're currently using. There are 71 chants in this book. They are the most loved, the most used chants. It's really perfect for parishes wanting to incorporate more chant, or just your choir. You could buy this for just your choir. It's inexpensive. It's $3 a piece. I think it's a great resource for the choir to have. There is an accompaniment book that is $30, I believe. But chant, unaccompanied chant, is really beautiful, and explore that before you jump into accompanying it. But there are times where they need the assistance, they need the help, the support from the keyboard. The accompaniments are there for you, just like they are in the St. Meinrad chants, antiphons. So I put together a list of the chants that I think every choir should know. The list was much longer. I had to keep editing and whittling down so it wasn't overwhelming. But here's the ones that I think everybody should know. I kind of put down the seasons or the main usage for them. Conditor alme siderum. We'll sing through a few of these in a moment. Attende Domine for Lent. Parce Domine, also for Lent. The Pange Lingua, of course, hopefully you're using that already on Holy Thursday for the transfer of the Eucharist. The Ubi Caritas, appropriate any time. Also Ave Verum Corpus, it's a Eucharistic chant. For years, I used the Ave Verum at the end of communion, frequently with the choir, so that the people got that chant in their head as well. A few Marian chants that we all should know. Alma Redemptoris Mater, love it. Regina Caeli, Salve Regina, and of course the Ave Maria. The Veni Creator Spiritus. If you ever, Easter Vigil, Pentecost, confirmations, ordinations, it's really a useful one to have. So let's look at, these are straight, these next few slides, you'll see the music for these chants that I'd like to sing through. These are straight from Laus Tibi Christi. Okay, let's look at Conditor alme siderum.
Conditor alme siderum, eterna lux credentium, Christe Redemptor omnium, exaudi preces publicum.
And so if you can see me conducting these, that first note, con is not the most important, right? Even though that accent is there, if you start conditor, not very pretty. So you're thinking weak, strong, right? Let's try that again.
Conditor alme siderum.
And there's that epicema there that you add a little bit of time. That quarter bar line there, right at the top of the staff. You can take a breath there, but look at verse 2. You might not take a breath there because of the text. So that kind of means, I think of that, breathe if you need it, right? The half bar line, the next system down, we would take a breath there. And then of course at the end, before the amen, that's a double bar line. We call that the same double bar line, and then the final bar line. You want to do verse 2?
Sure.
Let's try it.
Qui cononens intellitum, mortis perire speculum, salvas immundum lagrinum, donans reis rebellium.
Lovely, so beautiful. I actually use this as an entrance Antiphon chant at the beginning every Sunday of Advent. OCP publishes an octavo. I'm not going to say the name exactly correctly, but it's something like Advent Litany, Gathering Litany, or something by Michael Prendergast and Rick Maudlin, which I strongly encourage. It is beautiful. And that Conditor alme siderum, that chant is sung by the choir first, and then the people sing that same chant to English text. It's lovely. Okay. Moving to Lent.
Attende Domine, et miserere, quia peccavimus tibi.
So you see at the beginning of that, it's weak, strong, right? And sometimes, look at quia peccavimus tibi. So I put a really long accent mark there, a long line over those notes to know that there's 3 pulses there. Ba, 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 ba. So I have a short pattern and a long pattern. Let's do that one more time.
Attende Domine, et miserere.
So you see re instead of bam bam. One more time. Attende.
Attende Domine, et miserere, quia peccavimus tibi.
Beautiful. So just simple. There's not this 1, 2, 3, 4, or 6. It's just fluid. Almost, I had a conducting professor who said it's circular. They usually don't talk about chant in conducting classes, but that's how you conduct chant. It's just movement. It's keeping pulse without being, it's keeping movement without giving heavy, heavy pulses. Ubi caritas, I'm sure we all know this.
Ubi caritas est vera, Deus ibi est, congregavitos in unum Christi amor.
But if you need that breath, you can take the breath. Listen to that. Do that system again with the breath.
Congregavitos in unum Christi amor, exultemus et in ipso iucundimus
that us Deus. Good. Ave verum corpus. For time's sake, I'm not going to go through that one. I want to do one that has a qualisma in it. So look at the Salve Regina. Nothing more beautiful than hearing a church full. I do a lot of ordinations, and the Salve Regina is frequently done at ordinations, to hear a church full of priests chanting the Ave Verum. The Salve Regina. It's stunning. When you get to the bottom of that page, the last two systems, you see the little squiggly line over those second notes there. What that qualisma means is that the first note is held a little longer. So you're hearing this. Sorry. Necessarily watching everything that you do. The most important part is that it is fluid and helpful to your choir. So they, on a held note, give them that indication. All right, so I have Jethro beside me here, probably saying it's time to answer some questions, Angela.
And we got a lot of good ones.
Okay.
So we'll jump right in. And some of the questions may not be answered. They may be about particular accounts, or there may be questions about generic music theory that we may not get into, but we'll dive right in. So you did answer this a little bit, but there's a specificity to this question that I was hoping you could speak to. Would it be appropriate to have an opening hymn with the priest stopping at the foot of the altar, then once the hymn is concluded, the introit is sung while the priest incenses the altar?
Great question. That's exactly how we use the Gregorian antiphons for diocesan liturgies. So especially we had an ordination a couple weeks ago, have another one this Saturday. We begin with a gathering song. I probably shouldn't call it that, but that really gets us excited to be there, gathering song. And then there's incense used, and at that moment we go into the Latin Gregorian chant. And then usually it's pretty well timed that the Archbishop goes to his seat, and we are ending the antiphon. It works very, very well. Great question.
So here's a question. Do you find that the congregation sings these antiphons as well as the traditional hymnody used at the opening chant?
Well, I'd like to think people sing more than they actually do all the time. When you're smaller, churches can often help with singing. Like, people sing more because the church is smaller and they can better hear each other, or they feel more intimate. At the cathedral, while it's not enormous, it's a large space, and I kind of like to look out there and see who's singing, but they don't sing as much as I wish they would. I think with the antiphons, they sing the Columba Kelly, Meinrad antiphons, singing just that little assembly response, boy, they really sing that because it's easy. And I have to say that singing chant for people for a non-musical assembly is easier than often hymnody, because hymns have some skips and leaps and rhythms that are different, and chant is just, it's like talking. So we OCP publishes a mass also by Chris Walker called the Belmont Mass, which I love, and it is so intuitive because they know the text. In fact, do you ever look at your assembly and they're singing from the text? Like if you, when the New Roman Missal with the changes, we purchased, a card that just had the text of the Mass. People just hold that. And that's always amazing to me. I think, how can they sing that without the music? We musicians, we need music in front of us. But non-musical assembly members don't. So chant actually is so easy for them to sing. So that's a great question as well.
So there's a couple of questions asking you to elaborate a little bit more on seasonal responses.
Seasonal psalms. So there are seasonal psalms, which common psalms and seasonal psalms. The seasonal responses for those common psalms are different than the appointed ones for the Sunday. The same thing with the antiphons. There are seasonal antiphons that you could use throughout the whole season of Advent, as opposed to the appointed one for the day. So that's a good way to get them to really, your choir is going to sing that 4 times instead of 4 different ones. Our offerings do not include those seasonal psalm responses. So we can't give you those. You'd have to find those in the, I believe the seasonal responses are in the Liber.
So another question is, how long does it take a congregation to transition into being able to sing antiphonally if they haven't done it before?
Yeah, well, the antiphons, your assembly would not sing the antiphon itself. Those are too complex for them to sing. They would sing the congregational response if we're talking about the St. Meinrad antiphons. Now, singing chant in general, it doesn't take long. You would be really surprised. We sometimes underestimate the assembly because they don't sing as often as we'd like, but chant is one of those things that they sing, I think, better than you'd expect. But they won't sing the antiphons.
So are these best sung accompanied or unaccompanied? Again, that's, a mixed bag, but
yeah,
what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it depends. I love unaccompanied chant, especially when it is sung by a choir. Now, a cantor, it's easier for a cantor alone if there's a little support. The organist should be sensitive in his or her playing to not get in the way. So being support, but not as noticeable as perhaps hymn playing. Hymnody is all about an organ, right? Organists love to play hymns because they get to go off and do free harmonization at the end, and they love that. Accompanying these are not meant to be about the organ or the accompaniment, nor actually the singer. It's about the text. So I do them unaccompanied, but that's not to say that you have to.
So here's a question about the reception of communion. If you're going to sing in a communion antiphon as well as a hymn, when is the appropriate time for a choir to go to communion?
Oh, for a choir to go to communion. Well, that's a great question. I was going to say, in my situation, the distribution of communion takes a long time to begin. Sometimes it's to my back, so I don't always. But sometimes I think, what's going on back there? Why is it taking so long? I'm sure we've all experienced that. So the priest receives in both forms, and then music can begin. That's what the instructions say. Music can begin after the priest has received. It sometimes doesn't feel right to just break into a big song. So the communion antiphon is the way that it feels a natural way. It begins in a quiet way often. Mr. Walker on the choral ones, he's so skilled and smart about the way he did these. They usually begin softer. The high point of the piece is someplace in the middle, and they end quietly, respectfully. And then there's a pause, or your accompanist should be graceful about going into the communion song. If they are able, could they improvise for a little bit on that communion antiphon and maybe change keys into the communion song? That would be lovely, huh? But I always have the choir receive communion when the assembly does. I'm not a huge fan of having the choir come up on their own or receiving communion afterward. So they take communion at the same time. They are part of the assembly. They are liturgical musicians, but they need to feel part of that assembly. So they take communion at the beginning of communion when they're singing a communion song. I'm fortunate to have the choir be large enough that the music doesn't feel like it all of a sudden stops. So singing continues on through that whole thing. You might have just your cantor start the communion song while the rest of the choir is going to taking communion. That's just how I do it.
Great. Are there congregational editions available for the resources you showed us today?
There are. So that the St. Meinrad resources, the 6 volumes, there's that little book for the assembly. It's really well done. It gives them the antiphon. So they could sing the antiphon if you have some skilled assembly members out there. But the choir sort of leads that antiphon, but they see that antiphon and the congregational refrain. So there's an assembly edition for that. Laus Tibi, the green book that was the chant resource, that's intended for the assembly as well. That was a supplement to, like, if you have journey songs, that fits in the back of journey songs. Or if you have breaking bread, that could be right beside breaking bread. While breaking bread does have a fair amount of chant in it, Laus Tibi is only chant. So that's for the assembly as well.
Great. So here's a question about somebody who's interested in getting the usage of antiphons started at their parish, but their priest is not, it's not clear, but it looks like their priest is either not on board or not involved in the decision process. Do you have any strategies for helping start using antiphons at a parish?
Yeah, that always, I've heard that question a few times. It's surprising to me that a priest might not be on board with that. They're the proper texts. They are intended to be done at those moments. They accompany that liturgical action. Anything that is in the Roman Missal, I think, how can you argue with that, right? Maybe it's the style. I think it could be more about style than necessarily doing the antiphons. Maybe chant isn't his favorite. Maybe he's heard chant executed poorly, which is not beautiful at all. I would agree with him there. And it's not very appealing. While this isn't part of this question, I do want to mention that contemporary musicians should not exclude chant. And we have intentionally included many different chants in Spirit and Song, our newest edition of Spirit and Song. They are accompanied, they are metered, but it gets the chant in the heads of people who would normally think, I don't want to do chant. So explore some of those if you are contemporary musicians.
So here's a question about the germ. As far as the entrance, offertory, and communion options, the 4 options listed, are they hierarchical? Is one more preferred than another?
Well, since the offertory antiphon is not in the Roman Missal, I would say that is the one most commonly omitted. I don't believe that, I think the entrance chant is probably the one that if you're going to do one or the other, that might be the one to start out with because it's the proper text intended to begin that liturgy. It's specific to that day. Well, so are the communion antiphons. And I always love when we do a communion antiphon, and at that moment in liturgy, they've heard the readings, they've heard the homily. They tie in so well, and you think, isn't that great to hear that text just one more time? So I don't think either is more important than the other. If you are a choir and you want to begin these using them, doing the communion antiphons that Chris Walker has set might be the way to go. If you are wanting to incorporate more chant and use the antiphons, then the entrance antiphons might be the way to go that Columba Kelly has set.
Here's an interesting question. Somebody wants to know if, when singing chant in Latin, would you suggest providing a translation for the assembly?
Well, I always do. Always include, but I think when a worship aid is not used, so if you don't use a worship aid, it's tough. It can be like singing nonsense if they don't know what they're singing, right? Or hearing nothing. So I feel like unless you have a translation in front of you, or perhaps you could, before the liturgy begins, speak that text to them, or say, we will be including the communion antiphon, and here is the translation, and say that with them. But it is important that they know what you're singing, what that text is, or it becomes too much a performance. And I'm just not a fan of that. While I love choral music, and my choir does 2 choral anthems every day, I think the texts of the people need to be known and understood.
We do have a few other questions, but we're running up against the hour, so we're going to close it down, but those questions will be answered after this webinar is over.
Great. Thank you so much for being here with us for this hour. There is OCP is committed to providing webinars for you. There is another webinar coming up on November 11th at 9 a.m. teaching your choir, your Spanish choir, to sing in harmony. That is Stella Garcia Lopez and Rudy Lopez. They'll be running that webinar for you. So should that meet your needs, do go in and sign up for that one. We so appreciate the time that you give to us, and your feedback is always welcome. Thank you so much for being here.